been a really big day for XRP. There's been a lot of really interesting things happening. Obviously, kind of the most important of them being that the SEC is dropping their appeal against Ripple. So now essentially that XRP is completely unburdened. I think this is going to bring a lot of kind of bullish sentiment to the XRP community, the XRP crowd. One of the things that I am wondering a little bit about is how much this is actually going to impact XRP, just because the kind of XRP community has kind of been expecting this for a little while now. And I think that this might have maybe potentially been priced in. I'm not 100% sure yet, but it seems to me that like there is that possibility. So we are going to be taking a look at XRP price. We're also going to be going over some of the news, all that type of stuff, how XRP fits in. And then I did actually have a video on X that I wanted to go over a little bit later, talking about essentially how XRP could hit 100,000. This is like the only or like the first like semi-logical explanation that I've heard as to why XRP's price could skyrocket. I still kind of am skeptical, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that and kind of break it down a little bit of kind of how it could potentially happen and why it probably won't. Again, just kind of full disclosure of kind of where I'm thinking and where I'm sitting with that. But again, we'll get to that later on in the video. Starting out though, I did want to talk about kind of the SEC news. We can see here Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse confirms the SEC will drop their appeal against Ripple. Garlinghouse also states Gensler's SEC was fighting a fight that was about power grab, that was about overreach of the bureaucracy to take a new industry. I do think that there's a very, very large and clear sentiment kind of all throughout the crypto industry and a lot of people within kind of government and even in like tech. And if we look in AI, not even just crypto specifically, but I think there were a lot of people who are kind of pushing the theory that this could have been potentially a motivation. A regulatory captures is kind of the term that's been thrown around for that. I do think that XRP is kind of the main recipient of that, but also we saw like, Uniswap get hit with a Wells notice. We saw Coinbase, I believe, get hit with a Wells notice. There were a whole bunch of like essentially all of the like legit crypto companies in the US were getting hit with Wells notices when you have scams abundant everywhere. So like it just didn't make any sense. I'm glad that we have more of like a reasonable SEC, a reasonable kind of administration from within both the SEC and the CFTC, so we can see like hopefully some more like regulation and kind of some like common sense rule-making regulation, all that type of stuff kind of coming through the crypto industry, because I think that is what would be kind of needed. And with with all of this, we can see that kind of Ripple could be a good way to kind of pave that path and lead that fight, just because they have fought and beat the SEC kind of in this game. So I do think that that's a really, really big news here. Obviously, we can see Garlinghouse kind of making the media rounds, kind of taking the win, which of course is very, very well deserved. They've been fighting this fight for years and years now. So I think a little bit of a victory lap here is definitely well deserved. Now, moving on, let's take a look at crypto bubbles. We can see what's going on here off of this news. We can see XRP moving up pretty decently here. A pretty good day for them overall, obviously. XDC also making a little bit of a move, same with XLM as well. So obviously kind of XRP being the main winner. We can see Telcoin actually doing quite well. I think I'll probably make a video here in the next couple of days talking about Telcoin. This actually to me seems to be like it could be an XRP beta play. So we are going to be talking about this here in the future. If you are interested, like, subscribe, do all that type of stuff so you can, make sure you turn on the notification bell as well, just so you can get notified when this video does come out. From what it seems like, Telcoin is a very, very similar product to XRP, but what we can see is their market cap is only $500 million. XRP, $142 billion, right? So this could be potentially a very, very strong beta play if you do believe kind of in the values and in the vision of XRP. So just something to think about. Like I said, turn on the notification bell, all that type of stuff, so you can stay tuned if you do see, or if you are interested in seeing something like that about Telcoin. Also, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about my private Patreon group. If you are interested, feel free to join that. I've been talking to people in there, obviously having some more of that kind of one-on-one personal interaction. It's very, very easy to get signed up. It's really nice having kind of that private community to talk with. They got a lot of my thoughts kind of right as the FOMC meeting was happening earlier on yesterday. So there is kind of a little bit of that you can get some of my initial takes on things before I have the chance to go through and make a video. Obviously over time, it does take me a little bit of time with a real job and having to edit it and all that type of stuff. So you can get some of my real thoughts there if you are interested and kind of on that, like the speed of getting kind of what I'm thinking as it happens. Like I said, link in the description below if you are interested. But moving on, I want to take a little bit of a look here at XRP and just kind of discuss the chart, because frankly, the chart is looking pretty strong. And so I want to kind of dive into that a little bit and just kind of see what we're working with here. So obviously we can see from the Bollinger Bands, it's kind of sitting pretty comfortably within the Bollinger Bands. Nothing too crazy going on there yet. Frankly, we really haven't seen anything too crazy going on with XRP from like a Bollinger Band perspective, other than kind of like this massive liquidation wick that we saw back in early on February. Prior to that, we could see kind of in the Bollinger Bands, we were seeing that squeeze and the massive level of volatility happening here, which is of course been good to see. We've been holding this kind of like slightly descending trend line here, kind of to the bottom side. We can see it's hit or kind of like maybe wicked a little bit below, but then come right back up. We can see that this is held actually pretty comfortably, basically ever since like the beginning of December. It's come up above this line and then kind of held it all through, still not actually breaking below it. And then we can see a little bit of a more steeper descending trend line up at the top. We can see hitting it probably about 3 or 4 times so far. Obviously, that may change kind of over time as we kind of continue through. It is a little bit of a wedge. It's a very, very shallow wedge. So this is something that could drag on for months time if it really wanted to or needed to. Obviously, XRP holders they're no strangers to a multi-month, multi-years long wedge. Obviously, there was a lot of this being discussed about how there's a kind of a multi-year long wedge forming for XRP. And then it obviously did break out of that to much success, making far newer highs and doing really, really quite well. And so of course, things looking very good there. If we do look at RSI, again, kind of sitting about middle here, Bollinger Band sitting about middle. Nothing really too special going on with the XRP chart, at least for right now. But with their claim that they have, the SEC has dropped their case, all of that, or dropped their appeal, all of that type of stuff, I do think it is possible that we could potentially see that pump to $5. I do think if we do see like a true alt season come, I think $5 is a pretty comfortable bet to see XRP hit that. Again, no guarantees in life. We never know for sure. But that would be just over a 2x. Not too bad. If you go for some smaller crypto plays, you might be able to get a little bit better return than that. But considering the XRP is such a large play that, maybe that, or such a large coin, maybe it's worth it. I don't know. You have to make your own decision there. Not financial advice. I'm only here for, my opinions and kind of breaking down some of the news and updates and things that we're seeing with various coins, with the crypto market, all that type of good stuff. So, but as of right now, there's nothing kind of imminently happening in terms of like a breakout, at least from what it seems, not really close to kind of either of the trend lines that we've kind of established over the past couple of months for both of them. So we're just kind of waiting and seeing. I do think at some point in time we could see that break out to $5. I just don't think, it could happen anytime within, now to, here's April is kind of where this is drawn. We could potentially see this squeezing down. Let's actually just draw this kind of all the way to a point here. See if we draw to a point, we could even be getting back into like, July or August. Well, probably about middle of July before we actually start to see this kind of come to a point. So we could see XRP definitely consolidating in this area for a very, very long time. But again, patience is usually a rare trait, and usually for the people who do quite well in crypto. A lot of the people who are fairly impatient in crypto don't do particularly well. So just something to think about. Again, obviously we don't actually know for sure what will happen with XRP, but just look at this. This is a fantastic looking chart. It's really obviously it has come back from some of the highs that it's seen, but never really coming back as low as personally I expected it to. I was thinking it would at least come back down to maybe like the $1.50 range, just because that's usually what we see out of cryptos. A lot of the cryptos that saw this kind of pump prior to or during like the Trump pump based off of the US election, Many of them have kind of come back down to the lows previously, maybe even down to like 50% retrace. Some are even lower than what they were trading at kind of prior to that election. And so XRP has held up incredibly well, still looking very, very strong from a technical perspective. So if you are interested in trading XRP, you want to leverage trade, you just want to spot trade and kind of DCA in on your bags, any of that type of stuff, I do have links in the descriptions for both BTCC, WEEX, and Phemex as well if you are interested. BTCC has a really nice deposit bonus of 10% bonuses on first-time deposits, as well as extra bonuses of up to $10,055 per user, as well as no VPN or KYC necessary. So a lot of really, really nice incentives here. Obviously, these are kind of like some trading incentives here. This is just straight up 10%, right? So if you deposit $5,000, you'd be getting $500 for free to trade, which obviously, if you're looking to accumulate as many XRP as possible, then, maybe that would be a good play just because it is free money, right? So definitely something to think about there if you are interested. Also, WEEX has like that 20 to 30,000 bonus, or bonuses up to 20 to 30,000. A lot of them kind of trading based. Some of them are kind of based on like activity, a lot of that type of stuff. And then Phemex up to $4,800. Again, if you are interested, all three of those links are in the description below. So now I want to go through and I want to talk about this interesting video that I found on X today, talking about the XRP SEC case being over. And essentially he's talking about how various experts are kind of claiming that XRP could hit $100,000 per token, and he explains how. So I want to kind of dive into this. We'll watch the video first, and then we can kind of talk about, the claim of how it kind of has maybe some rational basis to it, but then kind of coming back to reality of what realistically will probably happen. So we'll go ahead, we'll watch this, and then we'll come back to it.
XRP to $100,000? Here's how. There are experts out there that are predicting the price to go up to $100,000 at least for XRP. How is this going to happen? Well, they believe that the idea is that massive entities start tokenizing assets on the XRP ledger and essentially holding value on the XRP ledger. This will limit the supply of XRP that is available to use for on-demand liquidity. When you've got a smaller supply of tokens to use for the on-demand liquidity and a higher amount of transactions to use those small tokens with, the price of an XRP has to skyrocket.
All right, so this is one of the more, one of the more interesting, and I would say one of the more kind of like logically based arguments that I have seen for kind of explaining how XRP could see some absolutely insane price growth, right? And so again, I still have kind of some concerns or some questions as to if this would actually happen, because again, a lot of this is predicated on various things happening that I just don't think would happen, right? So the first one is essentially mass adoption from banks, from financial institutions. A lot of this type of stuff would be happening on XRP, and two things are going to happen. One, they're going to be both trading massive amounts of volume through the XRP network using XRP tokens, and then second is also going to be they're going to be holding and staking and tokenizing a bunch of assets on the XRP ledger using XRP, thus lowering liquidity. And then of course that liquidity crunch does cause the price of XRP to skyrocket. This does make sense, right? If you look at this in a vacuum, that is a logical like supply and demand type of argument. I think this is totally fair. The thing that I think a lot of people miss when they see this type of argument is this is not in a vacuum, right? XRP is not the only game in town. Something very, very important that has had a massive amount of success in particularly a couple recent years, stablecoins can do exactly this, right? But you don't need to have some arbitrary third-party token. You could just use US dollars, but like on crypto rails, right? US dollars are nice because there's no set supply. You could just print infinite amounts of them. And so you don't have to deal with this potential supply shock, kind of, supply crunch type of situation. And so again, a lot of people in crypto may not like that, but again, this is what the banks do. Fractional reserve banking is used for a reason. They print a whole bunch of monopoly money out of thin air and essentially kind of use that to manipulate things how they want, right? We can argue on the ethics of that and if that's the right thing or the wrong thing or anything like that, but that's just realistically how it goes, right? And so I think what we're failing to consider here is one, stablecoins exist. So this is already a workaround to this like artificially like introduced like scarcity. But then also we have things like Ondo, we have things like Plume that's catching a little bit of like recent success here. We've got things like Ethereum, we've got things like we've got a whole bunch of things that are vying to kind of do this like RWA, tokenizing assets, all of this type of thing that is also going to have kind of a share of that pie, right? I mean, just because there's no XRP doesn't mean a bank's going to be like, oh, geez, I guess I got to go spend 3 million XR or $3 million to buy a handful of XRP to go send my money. Like, very, very unlikely that that happens, especially when you have these banks with entire arms of them dedicated to risk management and kind of, liquidity solutions, all this type of stuff. I just find it incredibly unlikely that something like that happens, because then again, if you see a liquidity squeeze where it goes up to 100,000, well, what happens when that liquidity squeeze goes away? Does it go back down to 10,000? Well, that's a 90% drop, and banks are never going to take that exposure risk. This is the same type of thing why, every country's looking for a reserve or every institutions are looking for a reserve currency, which currently happens to be the US dollar. But, massive institutions would never use something like, the Argentine peso 2-3 years back, where it was experiencing 100%, 1,000%, inflation per day, right? This would just never happen because the currency that they're sitting in is not solid, it's not stable. And so the amount of money that they have, even if they're just using it as a transitory asset, you never know how much you're going to gain or lose from having that transitory asset. Even just if you're in it for a very, very short amount of time, that can mean a big number in terms of like exchange gain or loss when people are essentially like transitioning through, even just for volume. I do this, in my job, I am an accountant. And so I have dealt with foreign currency exchange before. And this is something that is a very, very big consideration, particularly for larger companies, multinational companies specifically, is they don't, they set up a whole bunch of hedging contracts, and they set up all these various types of, making sure they're, essentially holding their assets in stable reserve currencies. They do a lot of this stuff, and they have entire groups who are paid a ton of money to manage this type of situation. And so I just don't see a bank essentially just going in and be like, okay, yeah, well, we're going to use XRP, even though price could skyrocket 900% tomorrow and then drop 85% the next day. Like, that's probably just not going to realistically happen, because their like risk management and their liquidity management teams, like no one would ever really allow that, right? And so if institutions do get adopted on the blockchain, I think they're going to do it in a more kind of institutional native way, right? I mean, they might create their own private blockchain. They might just use stable coins that are technically like uncapped, and they can just mint infinite amounts of them if they need to. They can go on and they, maybe use a different type of, crypto that doesn't even exist yet. Or maybe they use like Ondo for assets and XRP for portions of their volume, and Bitcoin for storage. And, they could use a whole bunch of different types of things there. But I just want you to be careful when you're kind of looking at videos like this, because on the surface, I will admit, it does sound logically like coherent, right? I mean, it makes sense how this could happen. But again, I think this only makes sense how this could happen in a vacuum. So just want you to be careful of that. Again, of course, this doesn't change kind of like my short-term vision on XRP. I do think $5 is totally possible. I think in maybe a wild world, potentially $10 is even possible. I do think that would be a pretty wild world, but I do think it is possible. I think at that point, it probably would be flipping Ethereum. We don't know that for sure, but I would imagine that it probably would be. I think the XRP community is very, very strong. I just think we need to kind of put on some reality checks in some of this. Like, it's going to hit $1,000, it's going to hit $10,000, it's going to hit $100,000, because I just don't see a realistic world in which that actually works out at like a sustainable level. So anyway, hopefully the information in this video is useful and helpful. If it was, a like and a subscribe really, really does help me out. Also, if you want to kind of continue to stay tuned for future content, hitting that bell when you do subscribe also does kind of get you notified for future videos if you are interested. And then again, I do also have all the links in the description below for trading if you're looking to trade, and then also to my private Discord group if you are interested in doing that as well. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.